very good example in the past 40 years. What we are
looking at is how do we utilize our location as a geo-economic location, which has three pillars. Number one is connectivity. Given our location, if we can use where we sit to connect south from north, westward and east theoretically, then you optimize the use of your location. So in terms of policy, you may have noticed a very strong shift towards Central Asia. That has been an area that has been closed for a long time. But you've seen, I think, 2 or 3 or 4 major visits, including just last week by the Prime Minister. Because Central Asia connected through Afghanistan down to our warm waters is by far the most economical route for Central Asia, gives Afghanistan a lot of transit fees, and of course Pakistan benefits tremendously. And that's why the Gwadar port becomes central. Second is CPEC. That's the north-south corridor. Again, the idea is basically connecting China down to the warm waters for their global trade. And Pakistan becomes the transit territory. Too much is said about CPEC and strategic project and this project and that project. Basically, if you understand the overall umbrella, the vision, it's very clear what CPEC is trying to achieve, which is more infrastructure, more energy and transit through Pakistan. That's essentially what it is. And then theoretically, we can also extend connectivity eastward. Unfortunately, that flank is closed because of the kind of government attitude, behavior and trajectory that India has. The current mindset of this government, the Hindutva ideology, etc., there's very little rational conversation that's possible. But theoretically, that also at some point can open up. So connectivity is the first pillar of this vision. The second one is development partnerships with the world. Not assistance. Of course, Pakistan will require assistance for the foreseeable future. How do we create real partnerships in terms of trade, investment, export, FDI and all of the rest? For that, of course, a lot has to be done internally as well. You know, investors are going to come, it's like osmosis. Wherever there's the path of least resistance, they will come. And so we have to ensure that particular aspect we improve on, but that's sort of how we are operating or interacting with the world. Now, both these cannot be fulfilled unless a third element is in the mix, which is internal and regional peace. That is why you see so much effort going into ensuring the writ of the state across the board, ensuring that, you know, there are no domestic fault lines that can be misused. You've seen Pakistan's counterterrorism performance, alhamdulillah, since 2007 and where we are today. And then regionally, Afghanistan is probably the best example. Even India, frankly, there is enough in the news to know that, you know, there was a conversation to see whether there's any way forward. I'm disappointed to inform you that, you know, it's very unfortunate the direction today's India is going and what is happening there. And the sooner the world opens their eyes to the fact that it has now become truly a regional threat in the way that India is behaving and has a conflict with every single neighbor. But anyways, we'll leave that for another day. The Afghanistan piece is central to this. Because unless Afghanistan is stable, how do you get a corridor of connectivity from Central Asia down to our warm waters? And unless Afghanistan is stable, how do you actually extend the connectivity that Pakistan has through road, through infrastructure, through energy to Afghanistan? And so that's why in our sort of national security vision and this third element of peace, Afghanistan is critical. And I will come back to this. But just let me complete the thought of national security. So this is the economic security paradigm. The second part of this, which is human welfare, you have seen everything from social safety nets to cash transfer programs, SRs, you know, tons of conversation. And I'll be honest with you, one of the reasons we've survived COVID without a negative economy, in fact, a a growth economy is because of this sort of welfare orientation of the current government and the Prime Minister. So it's very, very serious about this Riyasat-e-Madina concept. People, say all sorts of things. It's real. You can call it whatever you want, but the idea is this welfare orientation, a redistribution towards the poorest Pakistanis. And the third element, of course, is military security. And I just want to make a very simple point here. For too long, this conversation has gone on. Pakistan spends this much or that much or whatever. Please name one other country to me which lives in a neighborhood where you've got a 7 times larger neighbor with the history that we've had with India, that lives with a neighbor that has been in turmoil for 40 years, non-stop, where approximately 4 million refugees are still in Pakistan, where we've had to deal with terrorism. There's so much talk about the last 20 years. And mind you, I have to tell you, the partnership with the US has been a two-way partnership and a very good one. Over the years, Pakistan has benefited tremendously, the US has benefited tremendously, but there is a question that comes to the mind of the average person. There is so much focus, and rightly, on evacuating people, diplomatic missions and all of that. There is another country that had nothing to do with starting the war in Afghanistan that has ended up with 80,000 casualties and $150 billion in losses to the economy. And nobody wants to bat an eye. So, we are also human beings. At the end of the day, sometimes I hear people saying, well, Pakistan's taking too strong a stance. I'm not taking any stance. All I'm telling you is that somebody lost 2,000, somebody lost 5,000, somebody lost 7,000. This is a figure of 80,000 for something that we didn't start, for a backlash that came because of what was happening next door. So at least please respect this idea that there was a country that supported a war and lost tremendously because of that. Differences can be there, but that reality can't be changed. So anyways, the military part of this is we are a grossly under-resourced defense sector. I'm not here to say that it needs to be more or whatever. All I'm telling you is, given the threats we face as a country, there are very few countries you can find who would be managing the situation in this small kind of resource pie that we have. So my job, or the job of the system, is to ensure that if the national resource pie, let's say, is at $250 billion, it goes to 400 billion and then 500, so that everybody can get more of that larger pie that can be distributed. So that's essentially the idea. So if anybody tells you that Pakistan is very narrowly looking at security, it's completely wrong. That's the approach, and the core of Pakistan's security is economic security. The last part of this security vision is that we live in a world where we call it hybrid warfare, 5th generation warfare, whatever you want to call it. Bottom line is, perceptions matter more than reality today. No matter what Pakistan does, if the perception remains negative, you lose investment, you lose tourism, you lose serious conversations, the cricket team decides to leave. When they get a threat sitting in London, they say it's perfectly fine, we'll continue. That information space, Pakistan has to do much better in, to ensure that our story is getting to the world. What we find is that we have a neighbor that spent millions and millions of dollars sitting in Afghanistan, not only to perpetrate terrorism, but really to create a fake narrative about Pakistan. And let me make a very provocative statement. The governments in Kabul and India combined are the reason for creating a narrative in Afghanistan that told the Western world that there is no problem internally, the government is legitimate, the Afghans will stand behind it, the army will fight, this is a modern state where everybody is emancipated, but there is this country next door called Pakistan that's creating the problem. This is the narrative that forced the world to close their eyes to what was happening in Afghanistan and face the embarrassment that has happened in the past month and a half. This was avoidable if there was clarity that the problem was with the corruption, with the lack of governance, with the questionable legitimacy of the government, the structural problem that Afghans never tolerate foreign presence for too long, And most importantly, the fact that the army was not going to fight. Now people are quoting General Kiani when he was army chief in 2010, going to the US and telling President Obama and his counterparts, don't do this, they will not stand, it's an ethnic society, tribe, it won't work. And today we are being blamed for not telling the world what was true. So the point is, what is done is done. At this point, we are very much focused on a very broad vision of national security. We are not in any camp politics. We basically want to work with the entire world on a geo-economic platform. And again, I hear honestly too much, our relationship with virtually every major power is good. But when the situation is fluid, we also have to keep on looking on how to optimize it. Finally, on Afghanistan, I think the biggest mistake the world can make is to dwell on the past and think if we had done this or that or who did what. And I shouldn't have said biggest mistake, a major mistake. And the biggest mistake the world can make is to repeat the mistakes of the 1990s and abandon this region. I don't say this for my sake. I don't say this for the government in Afghanistan. I say this in very selfish Pakistan national interest, because if this region is abandoned, if you had the Ashraf Ghani government and you told them for 2 months you will get no international assistance, they would have collapsed. You could have had, rocket scientists sitting there, it would have collapsed. If Afghanistan is isolated, you will have a mass migration problem because they don't have money to sustain, and international terrorists will get stronger. Why do we want to test a proposition that has been tested, which failed miserably, and everybody in the world accepted that it was a mistake to abandon, and we will not do that again? Pakistan has made its position clear. We stand for an inclusive government, a government which respects all rights, where Afghanistan is not used for terrorism against anybody. But this is not going to happen through magic. This requires that Afghanistan stabilizes so that the average Afghan after 4 decades can have some semblance of stability and peace. Because abandonment essentially means we don't care about the average Afghan. All we are saying is, look, we are done, this doesn't matter, right? We meaning the international community. So I want to be clear, Pakistan has no option to disengage with this region. We live in this region. We have a 1,600-mile border, 2,600-kilometer border. What do you want us to do? Just pick ourselves up and go somewhere else? We have a right to ensure that no instability flows from next door into Pakistan. We've faced enough turmoil for the past 4 decades. How will that happen? Number one is border management, sure. But the real way to solve the problem is to engage the political reality in Afghanistan, is to ensure that they get support so that they can stabilize the country, and use that to ensure what the entire world wants. Moderate governance, inclusive governance, no terrorism, etc. But to hope that somehow things will be okay without that support, I think then we are setting things up to fail, which essentially means that the average Afghan will suffer, the region will suffer, but I see no data point that tells me that we can expect a spillover of instability to remain confined in Afghanistan or Pakistan. The entire world suffers when something like this happens. And the final point I'll make is just on an ethical and moral ground, those that were there for 20 years in Afghanistan, I think owe it to the average Afghan to make sure that we avoid more negativity in any way. Pakistan will of course do whatever we can, but frankly we don't have that capacity to support beyond a point. So we very much hope that that engagement happens. I am not for a second talking about the word recognition, so please don't mistake this for some big narrative or statement. What I am saying is we've got to move beyond humanitarian aid. That is needed. but then there has to be institutional capacity building, some development to make sure that there is peace and stability in Afghanistan, while the conversation about rights and everything goes on to ensure that that's also there. That's as simple as that. It's the same as the global position, but this sort of dance about wait and see, let's see, we'll think, we'll do. Essentially, you did that with any government in Afghanistan for the past 20 years, it would have been the same outcome within 2 months. So that's where we are on Afghanistan. The overall scenario at this point, to me, if we go in the right direction, we will end up very close to where the Doha process was supposed to end up. What was that? It was essentially no war, no conflict. It was a government that can provide for its people and no terrorism flowing out of Afghanistan. So if we do this right, we will end up close to that. Thankfully, massive bloodshed has been spared in terms of the transition. If we don't do it right, then I'm afraid that the outcome is going to be very negative, and we've seen that before. How it plays out, who knows, but it was extremely negative last time, and one shouldn't expect that it will be different. Because at the end of the day, if there is a security vacuum, there's a mass migration problem, that's where it would go. So we very much hope that the world does right by Afghanistan, because it matters to us more than anybody else. No other country has suffered like we have because of instability there. So we have a right to keep talking about this. This is not on anybody's behalf. It's my problem, because ultimately it hits me much before it hits anybody else. Thank you very much.